Howdy gamers, it's me. I'm Zixel, and I'm the creator of the indie game Stick Knight Takes Over the Universe. And today we're going to do a tier list of all the weapons in that game. There are 30 weapons in the game, and if you don't know how Stick Knight works, basically, in the game, you go through 30 levels, which have their own enemies and their own themes, and you have to clear all the enemies in that level with a weapon, and then you get a new weapon on the next level. And each playthrough, the order of the weapons is randomized, so the name of the game is Mastery, and learning how to, use each weapon to your advantage and all strategies and how to use the weapons. And today we're just going to do a tier list of all the weapons in that game. So, and I don't mind these blurry doubles, I don't know how to remove them, but we're just going to start off right now. So here we have the axe. It's an A tier weapon. There's nothing too great about it. It's just a melee weapon. Not to say it's not fun to use. It's fun to use, but besides the fact that it's a cursed axe that you swing around, there's nothing too interesting to say about it. But unlike the axe, I have a bit to say about the baseball and bat. As you can see, I have created its own tier list because it's a bit infamous to people that do play this game. It's a run ruiner. It's a playthrough. It's a weapon that's going to ruin your playthrough and your game. If you don't know how the baseball works, you have a baseball and a bat, and if you have the baseball, you can click to, hit it, and upon contact, the baseball will do 10 damage to an enemy. And then once it hits the floor, you can go and get it, and then, hit it again. And you can also use the bat to do a small amount of melee damage, but not nearly as much as the baseball. But it is pretty hard to use, and that's why it is pretty infamous and why I'm giving it its own tier. But if, in all honesty, if you are really good with it, it can be an S tier weapon, can be a God tier weapon. But you're probably not going to be that great. It's probably going to ruin your run the first time you get it. Happens to the best of us. Next, you have the boomerang. This is a pretty good weapon, but there's just nothing to really say about it. Next, you have the boss weapon. That's the Star Shooter. There's nothing. I mean, this is an interesting weapon because this is the weapon you get when you fight the bosses. And unlike the rest of the game, which is about, combat and using weapons, the bosses are more about, dodging their attacks because it's really easy, or it's pretty easy to get hits with this weapon. So it's kind of unique in that way. And it's not really the star of the show when you're using it. Next, we have the Meatball Launcher. It doesn't really have an official name, but my friend calls it the Meatball Launcher because it kind of shoots out balls that bounce that kind of look like meatballs, and that's what I'm going to call it. It's an okay weapon, but there's nothing too great about it. We have another gun that shoots out bouncing balls, except this one, instead of the balls being affected by gravity, they more like reflect off the surface, kind of like how a ball would in Pong. And it shoots pretty fast, so actually I'm going to put this in A tier. This weapon, it should be pretty easy to get a kill with. It's more about feeling powerful than the challenge, some of these. Next we have the bow. The bow is a pretty good weapon. It's not the most powerful though, because it's kind of slow. Also, it has a delay to when you click and when it actually shoots. So that adds a bit of, you kind of have to learn, get used to that if you really want to use it effectively. Next, you have the chainsaw. The chainsaw is going in S tier, because although in the icon it looks like it might have half a foot of range, in the game it has pretty much 3 meters, and I shortened it for the icon. But it has pretty long range, and also it does a pretty decent DPS. It's an endgame weapon. It's another one of those weapons that makes you feel powerful without giving you too much of a challenge, but still pretty fun. Next we have the flying gun. This is going in B tier because I don't think people use it very effectively. So what the flying gun does, it shoots to where your mouse is pointing, it also moves to where your mouse is pointing. It flies, I guess. And once the gun reaches maximum speed, it your cursor can't catch up, and so it's just kind of stuck at your cursor sometimes, and that's not very effective for like shooting. So what you should do with the flying gun is you should make sure it doesn't get to top speed or move your cursor around so that you can effectively use it. Next we have the fist. The fist is, just another okay weapon, right? It's nothing too special about it. Next we have the flamethrower. Flamethrower is probably the best early game weapon, tier 1 weapon. Okay, let me just explain what I mean by tiers. I mean, tier 1 is before the first boss, tier 2 is after the first boss, and tier 3 is after you beat the second boss. So that's what I mean. So like tier 1 beginning of the game, tier 2 middle of the game, tier 3 end of the game. Okay. So yeah, the flamethrower is probably the best tier 1 weapon because it shoots out a bunch of flames and it's really easy to get kills with it. That's really fun too. The flashlight, it's in a bit of a weird situation because it's one of the exceptions to the rule that the weapons are randomized. Because this one, you always get it during the ghost house. And it's okay with that enemy. I think ghost house is probably one of my favorite areas. And I like it, it's pretty fun. Next we have the grenade launcher. The grenade launcher is pretty good. Before they, at launch it might have been an A tier weapon, because surprisingly it doesn't do as nearly high DPS as you might think it does, but after I buffed it, it does a pretty high DPS, and I'm happy with that. I think it's pretty fun. Okay, this is probably going to be God tier, the whole tier, and actually it is because it's the second recording and I have to record it twice because last time I picked a really bad audio mic. But yeah, this is the best weapon in the game, in my opinion. This is the most God tier weapon because this weapon shoots laser bullets that not only does the laser bullet do damage to an enemy, but it leaves behind trails that also can hurt the enemy. So you can kind of set down like traps if you're clever enough, where you shoot one wall and then it bounces back to another wall and it bounces back to this wall and back and forth, and then you've got like a bunch of trails that are ready to go, kind of like a tripwire with deadly lasers. And once the enemy hits that, it takes like 400 damage and dies, and boom. That's why it's my favorite weapon. Next, we have another God tier weapon. We have the laser machine gun. It may not be as interesting as the other one, but it shoots pretty colors, and that's I like that. But also, shooting pretty colors doesn't make your weapon a God tier. What makes it a God tier is that it shoots a bunch of lasers really fast, although they are in a spread, but that doesn't really matter because you can get pretty close to enemies. Next, we have the sniper rifle. It may seem pretty good, but I think it's low B tier. And the reason for this, although it may do 20 damage on a sniper shot, is, if you miss, and then you have to wait like 3 seconds for the laser to charge. And not only that, some enemies have like 60 health, so you have to shoot them 3 times successfully, of course, 3 times successfully to get a kill, and that can take a bit of time. Next we have the lightning, a pretty good weapon. Nothing really to say about it. You have a lightning cloud above your head, and you can click to create a ray of lightning that you can use to damage enemies. Next, we have the paint bucket, or as one writer called it, and I'm going to change the official name to the pain bucket. This is going, I think probably high S tier. It's one of my favorite weapons. You know what? Actually, I'm putting it in God tier. Yeah. Up above laser machine gun. And what the paint bucket does, it splashes an arc of paint in the air, which in the air the paint will do 2 damage, but once it hits a wall, it's applied, that'll actually do 5 damage, So if you have an enemy that bounces around, you can predict the movement where it's going to hit the next, wall or ceiling. You can splash there and then do a lot more damage if the paint was still in there. It's a fun weapon to use. Next we have the pistol. The pistol goes, I think, yeah, I'm going to put it in low A tier. It's a pretty good weapon, but the reason it's only at low A tier is because it can only shoot left or right, which is the thing that makes it fun, but it's also the thing that doesn't make it the best weapon. Next you have the punch gun. The punch gun is going in high B tier. It kind of has the same problem as the sniper rifle. If you miss, you miss, but not nearly as bad. It doesn't have the same, recharge time, I guess. It doesn't recharge, but the time between where you can shoot it again is a lot less. And if the ball, when it was retracting back, hits an enemy, that does damage too. But yeah, it still suffers the same problem. If you miss, you miss. So you better be good. Next, we have the shock bomb. And this weapon, I think this is going in S tier because it's a fun weapon to use. Basically, you drop a bomb that when it detonates, it creates a shock field that grows, and every fifth of a second that the enemy is in it, it does like 2 damage, and then it shrinks back. And you can drop a bunch of them, and I think it's a pretty fun weapon to use. Although with some enemies, it can be hard to like get them, especially the sun enemy on the rooftops. That one's pretty fast, and that might be a difficult challenge. Next, you have the shotgun. I don't know, maybe right about here. There's nothing too special about it, to be honest. Okay, next we have the skull. The skull is going in C tier because it's a pretty hard weapon to master, like the baseball and bat. Basically, you get a magic wand, and when you click, it summons a skull in front of your mouse. But the skull doesn't start off fast. He can go fast, but he starts off at 0 speed and then exponentially grows speed. And that's why it's a bit tricky to use, because the speed is a bit weird, and that's why it's at C tier. Next we have the spear, and the spear is probably going to go at low S tier, because the spear is probably one of the best tier 1 weapons. It hits, I mean, you can like stab it out, penetrates an enemy, does 10 damage, and comes back. And if you're still holding it, do it again repeatedly. Kind of like how it does it in Terraria. And if you're wondering why a lot of these weapons kind of remind you of Terraria, that's because I probably got a lot of inspiration from Terraria to make these weapons. Next, we have the Spike Shield. The Spike Shield is kind of a weird one. I don't know. Kind of there with the axe. Before I buffed it to make the spikes bigger, it would probably be here. Now that spikes are pretty big, I guess it's like mid-A tier. Basically, you have spikes around you that they do damage in increments of time. Every like fifth of a second that an enemy is penetrated with the spike, it does like 2 damage or something. Next, we have the spray bottle. Spray bottle is probably at low C tier here, because it's another weapon that is hard to master. And it honestly can't do a lot of DPS, so it's one of those weapons you really have to learn if you want to beat the game. Basically what this does, it sprays out a diamond formation of droplets, which each droplet does 1 damage to the enemy if they hit it. But it has a pretty long recharge time, and if you jump, you can mess up the formation while spraying. So you have to make sure you can get the best formation, so you can get the most droplets hitting the enemy. And so all those factors and nuances make it a pretty hard weapon to use, but a fun one nonetheless. Next we have the sword. The sword is nothing special. I mean, yeah. Oh. Meeny, miny, mo. Just put it somewhere. Yeah. Sword, you just swing it around and do damage, right? Nothing to it. Not so bad a weapon, I'm just saying. Next we have the Targeter. Targeter is, mid-A tier, because, you know, it's a pretty easy weapon to use. It shoots missiles that move to your cursor, so you can, like, move them around the map, you know, get around corners and stuff. Next we have the throwing knife. The throwing knife could either be at S tier or maybe, you know, mid B tier, depending on how good you are. So I'm gonna put it at low A tier, because how this works, it shoots a it throws a knife. You don't shoot a throwing knife. That doesn't make sense. You throw the knife, okay, and then when it hits something in an enemy or a wall, you immediately get the knife back. Which means if you're hitting an enemy point blank, you could do like throw a knife and then 0.2 seconds after that throw another knife and just keep going and get a really high DPS. But if you miss, it goes and you're at the opposite of the side of the map and it goes to the other opposite side of the map, and you have to wait like 3 seconds for it to actually hit something before you can get your next knife, which is the challenge of it. Next we have the true weapon, or as someone on Reddit called it, and what I'm now calling it, the Pine Perpetrator. This is going to God tier. This is a weapon that's similar to the Vilethorn in Terraria, and basically have a water can that creates trees that start off small and grow big and shrink again and then disappear. And then they can use to penetrate enemies. So we only have 2 weapons left. We're almost done. Next we have the turret. Turret is going near the shock bomb because the turret is also another fun enemy. I mean, it's not an enemy, although it can feel like a weapon that can be an enemy to you if you're bad at it. Unlike some games like TF2, the turrets don't lock on to the enemies. They don't like auto aim. They shoot in the direction where you placed it. Sometimes you can get a really good placement, or sometimes you can miss the enemy completely with your turret. They're also affected by gravity, so you have to keep that in mind as well. Finally, the yo-yo. Maybe not the best place to end off, because there's nothing too great about the yo-yo, but it's, you know, it's a tier 3 melee weapon. Might end your run if you're not that great at it. So yeah, that's it. That's all 32 weapons, I think, hopefully, in Static Knight Tags of the Universe, my game. If you want to check out the game, I'll link the Steam store page below. And, you know, it's just, have a great day, gamers.